Way back in 2019, Marvel Comics did the unthinkable with one of their flagship franchises. In fact, the publisher embarked on the singular publishing line of Krakoa for the X-Men, designating so many of their comics out of one singular location. After years of publishing, Marvel is finally ready to call it quits over on the Krakoan Age. My name is Ariko Braddock, and today, let's go ahead and celebrate the 35th issue of X-Men and the end of the Krakoan Age of Comics. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel. The end of an era, Uncanny X-Men 700. All good things must come to an end, and as good of a thing as the Krakoan era has been for mutant kind, the time has come at last. The tragedy and triumph of Fall of the House of X and the madness and mystery of Rise of the Powers of 10, they have all come to their end and led to this moment that will change the future of mutant kind for years to come. Written and drawn by an all-star cast of writers and artists who have been shaped by the Krakoan Age, this is one milestone no X-Men fan will want to miss. Also featuring a story of family by X-Men master Chris Claremont and a glimpse at things to come. X-Men 35/700 is written by Gerry, Duggan, Ewing, and Kieron Gillen. We have a litany of artists associated with the project. Colors over from Matt Hollingsworth and Matthew Wilson, among others. Letters from VC's Clayton Cowles and design from Tom Muller and Jay Bowen. In addition, here the cover over on X-Men 35 is illustrated by Krakoan founding artist Pepe Larraz as well as Marte Gracia. Really love the triumphant way that so many of our mutants are celebrating some of the end times of Krakoa, especially with the duo of Magneto and Professor Xavier, who are featured just on the second half of this beautiful cover here. Also want to focus in on some of the interiors coming in over from Adventures in Poor Taste. As we previously mentioned here, X-Men 35/700 has so many artists attached to the project, but we kick things off with the regular X-Men artist of Joshua Cassara, who's done such an amazing job rendering interiors on the last couple issues of the core X-Men series. Across Marvel's main X-Men series, Cassara has been doing excellent work with the character of Wolverine. It's so fantastic to see Cassara take on the older version of Wolverine this time, showcasing some beautiful panel bleeds and a great action sequence. I really love how all the writers of this issue were able to handle this sequence and transition it really naturally from Wolverine showcasing his attack on Professor Xavier to a choice encounter between two incredibly important mutants that kicked off the Krakoan Age in general. Watching the characters of Magneto and Professor Xavier reunite after so much time across the disparate issues was a great sequence, masterfully rendered over from the artist Phil Noto. It was so great to see so many of the facial expressions and to finally have these characters embrace each other after a prolonged absence within the scope of the series. Surprisingly enough, the bulk of X-Men 35/700 really covers a fraught battle between Marvel's mutants and the character of Apocalypse. Apocalypse has a choice confrontation with the character of Exodus and opens up a lot of his characterization. It did feel a little strange to watch Apocalypse working so closely with the rest of Marvel's mutants across storylines like Ten of Swords, as well as the recent Genesis War over in X-Men Red. I think watching Apocalypse fall from grace over in this comic book installment did a great job setting up the upcoming Era of Apocalypse miniseries and reinstating some of the animosity between that character and some of the other mutants. I'm really wondering at this stage if this is going to be one of the storyline elements that's going to carry over into the From the Ashes publishing initiative for the X-Men following this storyline. X-Men 35 boasts so many disparate artists across the narrative. It was very interesting watching so many different artists step in to illustrate the battle between Apocalypse and the rest of the X-Men characters. I particularly love some of the story elements that artist Leinil brought to the page and thought that his rendition of Apocalypse carried so much detail and animosity across so many of his individual images. Also, this storyline kicked off with some artwork over from Lucas Werneck showing Apocalypse's battle with Exodus, in a way that did a great job emphasizing just the power and abilities of both of these mutants across the page. I think Werneck is also really great at capturing some strong facial expressions for Apocalypse in particular, who has some great moments of battle across this particular narrative chapter here. There was something pretty special about seeing artist Luciano Vecchio return to the pages of an X-Men comic book so soon after recent installments of Resurrection of Magneto and Rise of the Powers of 10. I really enjoyed his sequence covering the fourth wall breaking nature of the X-Men and celebrating so much of their time across Krakoa over in this installment for the issue here. In addition to the main feature closing out Krakoa, X-Men 35/700 features 2 additional stories coming in from writer Chris Claremont as well as artist Salvador Larroca. This first one really focused on Nightcrawler and the rest of his family orientage over in this tale. And I really liked some of the narrative captions for the character of Nightcrawler, but did find that the melodrama and animosity that he carries towards so much of his disparate family members didn't sit well with me in terms of the characterization. For me, it really felt like Simon Spurrier had a more jovial energy that he was able to embark over to Kurt. And I think the way he's expressing himself doesn't quite match up with how Spurrier has written the character of Nightcrawler, especially in recent Fall of X comics like Uncanny Spider-Man. Salvador Larroca's art also leaves something to be desired for me on the page. I feel like some of the elements of tension between characters like Mystique and Destiny were a little bit too foreboding than they were ultimately meant to be. Thankfully, though, the final storyline in the collection left a lot of room to grow here. This one was really setting up the upcoming From the Ashes publishing initiative for the X-Men. This one was also written from both Jed MacKay and Gail Simone, featuring artwork over from Javier Garren. I thought the tone of this issue was just remarkable. It reminded me of some very early Fall of X comics, especially with the Uncanny Avengers. X-Men 700 wisely bookends the series with a fascinating plot thread that feels instrumental to the Krakoan age of comics. In fact, not only Krakoa, but to the Fall of X publishing initiative as well. In fact, I really have to hand it to both Gail Simone and Jed MacKay for taking some of the on-ramp that authors of Kieron Gillen, Al Ewing, as well as Gerry Duggan were able to implement in the main narrative thread and transition it very slowly into the From the Ashes storyline. Moving forward here, I really hope Marvel Comics will utilize so many of elements of Krakoa that made the line so unforgettable for the past couple of years to fuel really interesting stories over from the Ashes initiative for the X-Men characters. So at the end of the day here, I really think X-Men 35 is a magical comic book issue that rewards eagle-eyed readers of Krakoan comics with great reward. The updated characterization for heroes like Douglas Ramsey as well as the new Kafka was a great way to recontextualize this comic book tale. Also, I found some of these surprise plot threads with characters like Dr. Stasis and Mother Righteous to evoke just so many fascinating elements within the Krakoan age of comic books. But I want to know from you, were you happy with how the Krakoan age of comics ended? What do you think about the Fall of X publishing initiative now that it's wrapped up? Thank you so much for checking out our video review over for X-Men 700, and we'll be back to cover the future of the X-Men comics and From the Ashes as soon as they're published in July. Thanks so much for coming to check out our X-Men 35 review, and we'll be back soon. Bye.